Hi everyone, welcome back if you are new here. My name is Chloe and on this channel we talk about all things books. So in today's video I wanted to take a trip down memory lane and reminisce about all of my favourite 5-star books, my top tier reads, my all-time favourites. And the reason for this is recently, as you all know, have been trying to get out of my reading slump. So sort of take this as episode 3 in the whole breaking the reading slump saga. But recently I was thinking, okay, well, actually, if I could just find a really good 5-star book, I think it would actually help a lot. It would probably drag me out of this pit of reader's despair that I'm in. So that kind of got me thinking, well, okay, what actually makes a 5-star read for me? And hence this list was born. So I thought we would talk through it together. Now, I want to just jump into the video because I think it's going to be quite a long one and I don't want it to be too boring for everyone. So without further ado, here is my top 10 favourite books of all time. I just want to point out that these are in no particular order, but the first one is technically a series, and what I've done is I've counted any series on the list as one book so that you don't think I'm cheating. But the first one is the Throne of Glass series by Sarah J Maas. Now listen, I know it makes me a basic bitch, but this is the series that got me back into reading after years and years of not picking up a book. So I'm not mad at it. For anyone who has been living under a rock, if you don't know what this series is about, basically in book 1 we follow our main character Selena, who is an assassin that was sentenced, why was that so hard to say? She was sentenced to a labour camp as punishment for her crimes by the king. However, that very same king, a couple of years later, has decided that he's going to run a tournament to try and find the kingdom's best assassin so that they can become his personal assassin, and the crown prince releases Selena from the labour camp that she's in so that she can compete and be his competitor, his champion in the tournament. I loved everything about this series, the characters and their development, and not just the main characters, the side characters as well. I loved them all. The plot was incredible. Just so many tears were shed whilst I read this series. I loved every second of it, and to me this is the best of Sarah's 3 series. Don't come for me, you will not be able to change my opinion. This one is my favourite. You are entitled to your own wrong opinion, but don't try and change my mind. This one is the best. ACOTAR is good, Crescent City is, we won't talk about that, but Throne of Glass is forever God tier in my opinion. Okay, next up we have 2 books by the same author, and they are The House on the Cerulean Sea and Under the Whispering Door by T.J. Klune. Again, another 2 books that made me cry big fat tears for the whole last 100 pages of both of them. The House in the Cerulean Sea follows our main character Linus Baker, who is a very by-the-book caseworker who works in the department in charge of magical youth, and his life is meticulously regimented and he is a real stickler for his rules and routine until he gets assigned a classified case to an orphanage that is on a distant island, and basically he has to assess whether or not the children that live in that orphanage are dangerous enough to bring about the end of days. So, you know, no pressure. But when he gets to the orphanage, he meets the man in charge, Arthur, and the 2 of them grow closer. They form a very strong bond, not only with each other, but also he gets to know the children and care for them. And honestly, it's such a heartwarming story. The characters are so quirky and charming, and it's just an absolute must read. I encourage everyone to pick it up if you haven't done so already. Under the Whispering Door then is another tearjerker. So in this one we follow Wallace, who again, a bit like Linus, is very strictly regimented. in his life. However, unlike Linus, he's a bit of a dick. So he is not well liked at all. He is a very successful partner in his firm, but in order to achieve that level of success in life, he has basically been a bit ruthless and cut all ties with most of his family. He doesn't have any friends. He's generally just not well liked. So Wallace then, at the beginning of the book, dies of a heart attack and wakes up at his own funeral as a ghost, and is absolutely outraged to see that no one has attended. And then a reaper shows up and takes Wallace to a tea shop where he meets the owner, and it's during his time at the tea shop that he begins to realise that he's wasted his life being so cruel and so ambitious. And he sets out to live a lifetime in the 7 days that he has been given before he has to walk through the door into the afterlife. When I say it's a tearjerker, I mean it. It is as sad as it sounds. Now, this book does come with some trigger warnings, so there's a lot of discussion around death and suicide and other discussions around death. So if that is difficult for you, then just be wary, read with care. But it's truly a beautiful story. And in my opinion, TJ Klune can't write a bad book. So read them all if you can. Next on the list, we have another trilogy, and that is the Red Rising saga by Pierce Brown. My mind went completely blank there. Pierce Brown. So this I have spoken about very recently. In fact, it was in my recent reads video that I posted a couple of weeks ago. So I'll link that below if you want to go and watch it and get a little bit more detail. But this is an epic sci-fi that is set in space, and we follow our main character Darrow as he tries to infiltrate and dismantle the corrupt society that's been created by the elites of this world. I've read the first 3 books in the series, so like the main trilogy, but not the, I think, 3 or 4 other books that are a continuation of the story but set in the future. But the main trilogy is phenomenal. I've said it before, but it's like the Hunger Games on acid, but a million times better. And the plot and the character development is just amazing. Please read it. It's very intricate. I find it very heavy, because a lot of it is set during almost like a war. The tactics and the strategies that go into that, I find at times can be a bit whoa, but please just pick it up, read it if you haven't. Next up, we have Codename Verity by Elizabeth Wine. Now, I listened to this on audio, so I don't have a physical copy of it, but it is set in 1943. Can you hear those birds? How loud was that? There's a tree right outside the window, so I think they're in the nest there, but gosh, that was really loud. Yeah, thank you. We know. Anyway, this is set in 1943 during World War II, and it is about 2 British women in the forces who are friends. One of them is a spy, the other one is a pilot, and during a mission to France, their plane crashes. So they are stuck in Nazi-occupied France, and Verity, or Spy, is captured by the Gestapo. Now, she is interrogated and she's recounting her past, how she met Maddie, the pilot, what their mission is, etc. And it's all in a bid to try and win her freedom. I love historical fiction, particularly anything that's set in World War II. I find it so fascinating, and this one does not disappoint. I loved it from beginning to end, and I absolutely flew through it. Now, obviously, like I said, I listened to it on audio, so I got through it a lot quicker than I probably would have if I was reading it, but I finished it in a day. So either way, that's impressive, especially for me. The plot is so incredibly intricate, and I was absolutely speechless through most of the second half. So definitely highly recommend. Changing pace a little bit then to another trilogy, and that is the Green Bones Saga by Fonda Lee. Again, I listened to this on audiobook, so I don't have physical copies of them, but this is an urban fantasy set on the island of Caicon, and it follows one of the major crime syndicates, the Call family, who run this island, and it gives major Godfather vibes. They basically, along with another major clan, control the island and its supply of magical jade. This is the only place in the world that you can find magical jade, and those with the right training and the right heritage can use the jade to get superhuman abilities. So those people are called Green Bones. And the Greenbone clans basically keep the island and its economy running. However, there is major tension between the two clans, and the rivalry eventually turns out to an all-out clan war between the two. Now, what I love most about this trilogy is that it's set over a number of years, so a lot of the characters that you see in book one as children, actually you follow throughout the story and into late adulthood by the end of it. So you follow the Call family through multiple generations, and I think it's fantastic. There is war and politics and loss, and it's just so incredibly well written. One of the very few series for me that actually turned out to be well worth the hype. Book number 7 on my list then is The Martian by Andy Weir. This is the only one of his books that I've ever read, and I thought it was hilarious. Our main character, Mark, oh, by the way, before we get into it, apologies for the movie cover. I hate it, but I had no choice. Don't come for me. Anyway, our main character, Mark, is stranded on Mars after his crew had to desert a mission following a major storm in which they thought he had died. So they began their return to Earth not realising that he was still alive, and so the story follows him trying to figure out how on Earth... how on Mars? Is that a saying? How on Mars he can make all of his supplies last until help arrives, if it ever does. So the narrator, or our main character, Mark, is so funny. For such a serious situation, it's actually an incredibly entertaining read. I will say it's very heavy in the science. Now, I found it a little bit difficult to understand at times, and I come from a science background. That's what I do for work. But that being said, it was very entertaining, super suspenseful, and I'm really looking forward to picking up more by this author. Book number 8 on the list then is Daisy Jones and the Six by Taylor Jenkins Reid, and I kind of want to cheat a little bit and say pretty much any book by Taylor Jenkins Reid is my favourite. I've read almost all of her books and loved all of them, so she is, for me, an auto-buy author, but this one in particular I especially loved. This is another one that I actually originally listened to on Audible, and it has a full cast, so it just made it feel like a podcast, which was amazing. So Daisy Jones and the Six were a band back in the 70s who, at the height of their fame, broke up, and no one knew why until the band members agreed to do an interview as part of a documentary decades later. Now you get to see each person's commentary on the events that led up to their fame and subsequent demise, and it's really interesting to see that dynamic and how everybody seems to blame each other on why the band fell apart. Now, I know this one is a bit polarizing. People kind of have a love-hate relationship with it. Some people just outright hate it. And I think actually the fact that I listened to it on audio is part of the reason why I enjoy it so much. So if you haven't read it, I would probably recommend that over the physical book, which is just unheard of. But trust me, it is amazing. The full cast podcast style is amazing, and that's what really cinched it for me. Also, I love the TV series and I listen to the album frequently, so there's that. All right, we're nearly there, I promise. So next up we have Heartless by Marissa Meyer. I absolutely love fairy tale retellings, and this one is kind of like a villain origin story from Alice in Wonderland. So this is the beginnings of the Queen of Hearts. So this is set in Hearts, and it follows our main character, Catherine, who is set to marry the king, but despite being one of the most desirable girls in Wonderland, all she wants to do is open a bakery and follow her passion. So basically she's just like every other girl in the world who wants to open a bakery that's a coffee shop and a bookstore and just live her best life. Making no money. Anyway, so she has to attend a court ball in which she is expected to officially receive the king's marriage proposal, but there she meets the court jester, Jest, very cleverly named, and this is the first time that she's ever felt true attraction to anyone. But of course this is Wonderland, where there is magic and monsters, and fate has other plans. So I want to say that I read this one years ago and still think about it almost daily. It's probably one of the few books that I would go back and reread if I did rereads, which I don't really ever, but I would love to be able to experience this book again for the first time. It was just so whimsical and highly recommend if you haven't read it. I must say, I felt very similarly to the Lunar Chronicles as well by Marissa Meyer. Absolutely loved all of the books in that series. Didn't like the Gilded series, the little duology that was the Rumpelstiltskin retelling. Wasn't a fan of that, but Heartless, highly recommend. Alright, we are already at the last book now. Technically, I want to do more of like a special mention for 2 books for this one. And the reason for that is because these are books that I read when I was a lot younger and I was absolutely obsessed with them at the time. But I don't know how well they'll stand the test of time and how much I would love them if I were to reread them again as an adult. So that's why they're more special mentions. But for how obsessed I was with them back in the day, they absolutely deserve a place on this list. So, and I know that technically this means that it's 11 books, but we're going to ignore that. Books are Entwined by Heather Dixon and The Treachery of Beautiful Things by Ruth Francis Long. Now, Entwined is a fairy tale retelling, again, of the 12 Dancing Princesses, so it's very true to the original story, so I won't go too much into detail about that one, but very, very enjoyable. And then The Treachery of Beautiful Things is about a girl called Jenny whose brother Tom was stolen into the fairy world, and as she returns to the forest where he went missing to kind of say our final goodbyes, she is also swallowed up into the land of fairy, and thus starts her mission to try and rescue her brother and take him back home. However, she also meets Jack, who in true YA form eventually becomes a love interest, but he's honestly just more of a hindrance than a help, and is actually, from what I can remember, quite hostile and just trying to get rid of her for the most part. But of course this is fairy, and in the world of fairy nothing is as it seems, so she's faced with some pretty tough ultimatums as she tries to navigate this world. Both of these books are absolutely dripping with magic and whimsy, and they were just delightful reads, or at least that's what I felt at the time when I read them. And again, I'm too scared to reread them in case it ruins how I felt about them, but I absolutely adored them back in the day. So if you haven't read them yet, I would recommend them, tentatively. Plus, they are some of the prettiest books that I have on my shelf. I mean, look at those covers. Are they not just gorgeous? This was before the whole sprayed edges were a thing, but these covers are stunning. So there's that. I quickly want to mention before we finish up that I was going to include Fourth Wing on this list, but I loved the first book and felt kind of mid about the second book, so I've decided to reserve my thoughts on this until I've read the whole series whenever that comes out. Otherwise I would probably have included Fourth Wing on the list, but I'm not sure. I'm still on the fence about it. So I decided then to make this list either complete series or standalones that you could binge to your heart's content if you so desired. Anyway guys, that is it for today's video. Thank you so much for watching, and if you've read any of the books on my list, I would love to hear what your thoughts are about them, good or bad. Tell me what you thought. Please don't forget to like and subscribe if you enjoyed this video. I'd love to have you stick around, and I'll see you in the next one. Bye!